Let's carry on with Jesse Lee Peterson and his investigation of this African scholar and what we can learn about the history of Africa through a purely academic point of view.
Generation.
They did. They had cities, they had towns, they had road systems, they had pyramids, they had temples, and I'm talking about all three Americas. And most of them were mowed down. People, they don't want this history out.
Not only does the Americas have so many civilizations that they almost are the same number as all the others in the other world combined, but we just keep finding more. And we keep finding them creating and operating in ways that we just don't remember operating in other places. And remember, because they didn't have the influence of the other civilizations, it is always staggering to find out that they did similar things like farming, like the wheel, like pyramids, like different versions of statues that look like people coming from the other side, which could be an indicator of a mixture, but it's always important to stay cautious and healthily skeptical.
But some of the pyramids they left in even in North America, but Central America and South America still have pyramids. Yeah, the Pyramid of the Moon, it has not been touched. The Pyramid of the Sun, Tiahuanaco in Central America and Mexico.
He's right to squint his eyes in amazement because it is true that some of these civilizations in the Americas, like these, I mean, think about it, these were being built at the same time that other people in Europe, Africa, and Asia were fully unaware, whether it's Pumapunku, whether it's Tiwanaku, whether it's the panther areas, whether it's the waterfalls, and all of these are built with religious intention. They're built with mechanical intention. And that's the thing in the brain that you have to think about. Somebody, some human being sat down and planned all of this. To us, it's like, oh, that looks like a H designed by a computer. But think about it. This is an ancient man who sat down and made this design without any influence from the West, without any influence from the South, without any influence from the East. They sat down and built this. How? Why? When? What's the story that lies behind these? This is nothing more than fascinating, and its history should be explored.
But no, they're in. They had farms. These cavalry troops would come in to destroy these people, and they found they didn't just live in teepees. They had pueblo. They had all different types of businesses. They had farms, as I was saying, our acres and acres of corn and different things, beans and whatnot.
That's the other thing that's interesting because, I mean, as we remember, we were an agrarian nation up until the 1900s, meaning that everything we did was farming in human beings. When I say everybody, I mean every single person outside of hunter gatherers. The way that we gathered food was through farming. And other than that, it's hunting. The thing of today of having multiple moles and stuff like that, that is brand new. But back in the day in the Americas, we had the equivalent farming lifestyle, and it rivaled some of the ones that we found later. I mean, remember potatoes and all of these things that would be taken from the Americas and then sent to the other parts of the world. There's just foods that were discovered there first and then sent to the other side of the world. These types of foods are still today amazing because we're talking about organized areas. Now, there are some areas that we didn't even realize were organized. For example, in this image, it's a depiction. Well, not this one, but the previous one was a depiction of the Amazon where there was farms. And that's the scary part, is that the Amazon, just like the Congo, we know that there's a civilization that existed in the Congo that got covered up. Just like the Congo, this is the cool part. Uh, Central Africa and the Americas has a very similar vegetation, and they grew. So they had to constantly cut away the trees at all times in order to maintain these civilizations. And remember, if you take the circles of Benin or the walls of Benin, and then you also take the Americas, you have the same situation where the trees regrow and you can't see the civilization buried by nature itself. And that's the cool part about it. The cool part is that these people were not only farming, not only doing that, but they were beating back nature. This means they were maintaining, doing heavy maintenance on these kingdoms in a way that it was not necessary in some of the other European, Asian civilizations, even African, to be honest, because there the vegetation is just so thick. And that's probably one of the things that spurred them to work so deep, because they were in the in the heart of vegetation where animals could probably come at them, which we know later on people started using those types of animals as not only religion but as guards for their kingdoms.
All over this country.
All over this country.
Not
Not as many, of course, but there were millions of people living in the Americas.
And so, you believe that black people are the first people on Earth, not only in this country, but the first people on Earth, right?
Before he talks about that, I want to revisit something historically, and I want to remind people that you could learn about the Native American history. Like at one point, Native Americans used to learn about their own history, to the point where if you learned nothing from any other part in history, you would still have a sort of full world history. I mean, their books and everything, unfortunately, a lot of them got burned by the Catholics. But if you had all the books, you're talking about learning about from the Mayan era all the way till today, and you've got this huge stack of papers. I mean, I sometimes like the alternative worlds, and I like to think like, where would they be now? Like if they didn't lose as a civilization, if they didn't get crushed as a civilization, and they just were part of the technological growth that we all have today. Think about where Africa would be. Think about where the Americas would be. China. We're talking about next level brain power utilized in their own way, instead of everybody being sort of touched by Western ideas and everyone being Christian or whatever.
Well, yeah, I mean, like I said before, genetically speaking, not even genetically, but physically speaking, you look at white people, they have white skin. The differentiation comes in different tones of skin, but it's still white. And different eyes. That's the major thing, is their eyes and their hair were different colors, all right? And they're, when you get to black folks, you have far larger and longer differentiations because we've been here on the planet so long.
That is legitimately a good point. One of the reasons why some people, for example, if we take Polynesians, you're right, who are considered black by almost everybody. One of the reasons why the group of Africans who have that level of diversity, so the reason why blacks have that level of diversity, and they don't want to consider them part of the same group, even though white people in the past did consider them part of the same group. That's why you have Melanesians and all of these. So if you take Polynesians, if you take Melanesians, so you've got the light eyes, you've got the blonde hair, you've got the dark skin, of course, and then you have the smooth hair or whatever, straight hair or coarse hair or any of these, the eyes and everything. The diversity was so large that people don't want to consider it a group anymore. At one time it was black or white. Remember, they had to start adding other groups in there in order to be like, yo, these guys are starting to realize that they're one of the largest groups in the world, because people who are from Asia, people who are from Africa, Americas, Native Americans, once they all consider themselves black, then the only groups that would consider themselves white and could even play that game were people from Europe And even people from the Middle East were like, okay, well, I guess we're all black. And that got a little scary. So they had to start breaking it apart again. And you know that people in the Middle East have large black populations and they've had good relations with them for a long time. But of course, that starts to break, and you start noticing that stereotypes that existed prior, so in places like India and all these places where there were black people, they got broken apart and replaced with like American stereotypes. This is because there was a new function that was put in.
We are the shortest people in the world, pygmies. The
We are the
largest people,
shortest people in the
shortest
world?
the pygmies, of course.
Oh, the pygmies are black people too?
Yes.
Of course, if you just stick with Africa alone and you don't go any further, you still find ridiculous amounts of diversity. You can find entire populations. In fact, I remember someone talking about this before, where you can find Bantu people who are pygmy, and then you can find Bantu people who are as tall as the Dinka. And it's like an entire population thing. And it's like, why is there so much diversity within just the Bantu people alone? There's genetic diversity of that level within that one language group.
You know, it. Anyway, getting beyond that, then you have the tallest people in the world, Watusis, and those the type of people who are the tallest. Then you go to the skin. The whitest people are albinos. Okay, a black person can be an albino, or he can be the darkest person in the world. So because
So while he mentions albinos, I'd rather talk about the variation when it comes to people like Khoisan people who can be as light as any of the Asians that I was talking about or Native Americans that I was talking about. And these people, which by the way is only one of the people that can be this light, but it's more typical within their population. This light skin that you see is also one of the variants of skin color, because we always talk about like, where did the light skin color come from, but you can tell that in Africa the skin variation can vary quite deeply. I mean, take most Bantu people are mid-tone compared to Khoisan people, and they're also mid-tone compared to like Dinka people who are extremely black compared to them. And then you have the Ethiopians who also have deep variations in their skin color, and then West Africans who vary, in my opinion, more than any of these groups. Like you can find extremely light people in West Africa, and then you can find extremely dark people.
we've been on the planet so long, the differentiations and changes had slowly gone out. Whereas the whites their differentiation is not as long. So as I said, there's just been 17 different pieces of information on our show that we've been here longer.
I'm sure he's got a list somewhere on the internet of these 17 pieces of evidence, and I'd like to investigate every single one of them. Already, I can see that he is at least well informed about the world. A lot of people have no idea about what's going on in the world, and also want to talk about the Indian civilizations and how there's always been Africans in those civilizations and how they operated. And the reason for that is not to undermine explorers, but to show you that Africans casually did what explorers considered large, life concerning missions.
Than anyone else.
I know you don't talk about religion, but is this in the Bible too, that blacks were the first on earth?
I don't get into that.
Have you ever? I know you don't want to discuss
Yeah.
religion or politics, but can it be? Is it written in the Bible that, as far as you know, that black people were the first on earth, the first black man that God created? I mean, the first man that God created was a black man.
Well, there is a reason why they first compare the individuals who were created on Earth with dust because of the color. But not only that, there are several parts of the Bible that indicate that Africans are some of the oldest people who were created. But we'll look at these at some other date. We don't need to look at them now. And there used to be a time when Ethiopian Jews were still arguing for themselves. And so they used to look into the Bible and people like Adam and places like that to try and look at what color was he. And they had all kinds of stories about the variation of Adam and everything like that. There's actually movies from Israel that you could possibly watch that talk about the discrimination of Ethiopian Jews and why they became accepted in the later years.
I've never read that.
Oh, okay. If it's true that black people were the 1st, why is that important? Why is it important?
Was it important?
Yes.
Perhaps the most obvious answer is because everything else spreads from there, and therefore they should be the most investigated or the most looked at for the answers of how we should live, be, grow, and also how we could expand into the future. Because, of course, wherever things start is probably how it's going to end. You know, as it begins, so it shall continue. And there's more than that, but this is the easiest answer that you can give.
Look at whites. Why is it important for them to be white?
Why is it important? What?
Yeah, to them be white. White privilege, white this, white that, everything. You see, if you don't read black history books, you would think that that whites built civilization, built this, did that, did everything. So when a black person, when a black child grows up in that type of environment, what does it make them feel like?
Now, it's not just a matter of feeling, but it's a matter of fact. The fact that we don't know where things started and how they started, or at least it's not taught, is one of the things that puts out propaganda in the world about how and when. I mean, think about every single thing that we have seen Egyptians do, or West Africans do, or Native Americans, or any other black civilizations that today, because of propaganda, we consider it being white. We talk about this a lot. Like there are some people who are like, I don't do that. That's what white people do. I don't do that. That's what white people do. I remember when they were talking about surfing, right? So a lot of people who used to surf, especially in South Africa, were considered it's like a white sport or something. And then, of course, when you do some digging, you realize that this is a sport that was done by Polynesians first and foremost, and then also you find Africans doing it on the east coast of Africa, and like things like skipping rope or whatever, just all kinds of things that have been considered white in history. But then when you go look at it, it was all invented by black people, and you go, why today are we looking at it like these are white traditions? Why are we looking at them that way? And it's all just propaganda. Anything worth doing, they're going to put it in the white bucket. Anything that's sort of destructive or whatever, they want to put it in the black bucket. And it's important to reverse that, to show people that no, 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 these things have been coming through for the longest time from continents like Africa. I mean, half of the things that we consider white, like from reading, writing, blah, 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 whatever you want to call it, they're all done first in Africa by black Africans.
How do they feel? You know, they say that that black children are the first to walk, the first to read, the first to talk. They're the first to think about this, that, and the other. And this comes from different scientific books.
So I actually know what he's talking about here. Remember, we watched that old guy talk about how Africans were some of the earliest, Africans and Indians were some of the earliest to walk and talk. And they put that down to race. Well, at least that Indian guy put it down to race. But we know now that it had more to do with how the study was completed, and that people who tend to live in certain ways, who tend to have a culture that relies highly on independence, those people tend to walk and talk first because that's just survival. And then other people of other civilizations like Europe, who can get carried and whatever for a long time, they tend to not have to do for self for a very long time, and so they can take a little bit more time to become what they become. Now, this does not mean that you're gonna, because you walked and talked first, you're gonna be more successful or anything like that, because we can see that in some civilizations, no matter how long it takes for someone to walk or talk, it's the education system for the next 18 years that will decide where you end up as a human being. And education system doesn't mean just the one that you learn at school. It also means your access. So if you're an autodidact, if you're a self learner, you can, do you have access to these? I mean, we can talk about the difference between what people know today since the internet came about, and people can just learn for themselves. We've seen people literally get into stock trading and any of these things which would be completely out of their reach in the past, simply because they have the research bug in their head, and so they take the time to learn and do things that people who are rich could not do in 1,000 years.
Okay,
Meaning that a
but
black child is first to talk before a white child or any other child?
well, I mean, this is what I read.
Or did you believe that?
Um,
So you don't believe that then?
That is legitimately hilarious. The disappointment on his face. You don't believe that. This whole thing is kind of, you know, that's one of the things I like about his interrogation skills, though, because he just lets you choose your own path. The guy just paused and said,
I'm not saying I do, I'm not saying I don't.
Uh,
I haven't tested the children. Could be true, could be false.
so if it's true that blacks were the first on earth, God created the black man first, um, what happened to black people? Why are they so screwed up? And not all, but most. They're not smart. They don't create. They destroy.
What?
They are even destroying the football team, the NFL. Now, when you just screw up the football,
Watch out.
yeah, when you mess up football, you know you got some issues.
so, of course, this is the agenda of Jesse Lee Peterson, which is to say that Europeans are, which is why it's important to have this guy inside of the in here so that he can talk about the civilizations and the great rebuilding of Africans and how we created civilizations. Of course, there's a question of what happened with these civilizations, and the answer is they're still going on today. I mean, I could show you cities and cities and cities in Africa, but it's kind of pointless. There's literally hundreds of them, thousands really, in Africa, and then you can go and look in what we're doing in India or any of these places. I've showed you Janjira before, and also you can look in other places. I'm actually going to make some videos about those places, and I want to remind people, because some people they like to talk about it once or twice. I want to remind people that they still live there, and I actually saw a video where they were interviewing some black Africans that live in India who have been there for at least 300 years. And then they asked them about Africa, and they're like, we've heard of it, but we don't know where it is. I mean, they've told us that's where we come from, but we don't know where it is. And it's pretty amazing to know that these people who have moved there are so inside of the Indian system that they don't even see Africa. And a lot of people like to talk about how, oh yeah, people don't know how they'll never mix together with the civilizations. Like they don't even consider themselves African in that way.
Um, does does that change black people in any way to know that they were first on earth? Why are they smart enough to show that they were first? Why are they allowing everybody else to outsmart them and outdo them?
Because of paid opposition like Jesse Lee Peterson and others. Some today are black, and I remember people saying we need independent media because independent media will stop. But then once you get independent media, then all of a sudden you have hundreds of black people who probably were desperate for money coming in and saying the opposite of the real thing. I mean, if you think about it, it's pretty smart on the white supremacist side where they go find some person who's struggling on YouTube. They give them a platform, they give them a little bit of money, and then they say, I mean, you are willing to do whatever for money. You are probably going to start, on a weird OF platform or whatever. Instead of doing that, just downplay your own race and you'll get tens of thousands of dollars. And then they go, you know what? Why wouldn't I? And you can see it. You can see it everywhere. They keep doing it. They're propagandists. So because of stuff like that, obviously it becomes difficult to challenge because the truth, I mean, they say hate spreads faster than love.
the majority aren't taught anything about that. They don't talk about that in their families. They're the majority, but there are plenty of black folks who know something about their history, and there's some who know a lot about their history.
Well, they may know about.
There's a lot to know a lot about it, but there's some people who don't realize how connected it is to one another, which is why I like to connect the Middle East, the European, and the Native American Africans together, because there is a ignoring of the connections between these people, because a lot of time people like to think that Africans, they leave Africa and then they have never had any communication, which there's a lot of Africans. I actually want to talk about some native, well, I want to talk about some black Africans who communicated with African Americans in the early years, like the 20s and all of that, from musicians to everybody. Because some people think that it's like an accident that African music influenced American music, but actually these people were in communication with one another, which is actually more difficult than it is today. Today we have the internet, so it's like, oh, we're communicating with one another, but that's like, no, back then you had to, it was very difficult, but they still did it.
The history, but they're not productive people. You don't really see them. They're not building a rocket ship to the moon, or they're not building nice neighborhood. They destroy neighborhood. Even with the white man.
So, of course, I've talked about how black people were involved in early space travel before. And I've also talked about how in the Americas, NASA was so racist, right? That they would allow NAZIs to operate at the highest levels of NASA, but then they wouldn't allow black women to operate at the same level as the other people. But, and those black women, they did all the mathematics and stuff, a lot of it, of the mathematics that would lead them to go to space. So you have to know the history behind that in order to talk about this. But of course, oh, it's just everybody's just dumb except these people. But that's just the history of it.
Give them a nice neighborhood, they turn it into a ghetto. Like the fallen Messiah, Obama.
Okay.
They gave Obama a chance, the first black president, to be the president of the greatest country in the world. And what did he do?
Okay.
Turn it into a ghetto.
So, of course, Jesse Lee Peterson has got his agenda, and he's displaying it right now, being insulting, because, of course, these white fans are going to find it hilarious. But we have to remember that Barack Obama left the country in a much more peaceful time, and then Donald Trump came in and sort of like depleted it again. And then, I mean, Barack Obama is so powerful historically that whenever they want a candidate to win on the Democrat side, they wait for his say so, like who is he gonna vote for? So yeah, there's all of that, but that's a conversation for another day.
How come if they're so smart and they're the first, why don't they create rather than destroy?
Well, going to another point you were talking about, why don't they create different things? They did create back in the day.
I'm talking about now, like over the last 1,150 years.
Let me finish my point, okay?
We'll let him finish his point another time. Let's cut the video over here because I think we have stuffed a lot of information in this one, and I want you guys to digest the information. Don't just take what I say as if it's like whatever. I want you guys to also do research because that's very important, especially the space thing. I should link the video in where I talk about how Africans contributed deeply into the space travel and us getting to the moon. And then, of course, when they kicked out the Africans, then all of a sudden we're no longer going to the moon. And now they're talking about recruiting people because they're trying to go to the moon again. You know why? Because China is going to the moon. Now that China is going to the moon, all of a sudden they've discovered, oh, we've discovered life on Mars, and now we want to go to the moon and go to Mars quickly because the Chinese are trying to do it. We know what it is.